The afternoon sun was high enough to make the backyard feel exposed. That was the first thing I noticed as I stepped out onto the grass. No shade to hide under. No corners. Just open space, folding chairs arranged in uneven rows, a long table covered with a bright cloth, and a cluster of people pretending this was a celebration instead of a performance. It was my birthday, 70 years old. I had told my daughter I didn't want a party. I said it plainly. No fuss, no crowd. Just a quiet afternoon, maybe a meal, maybe a walk later if my knees allowed it. She insisted, said milestones mattered, said people wanted to celebrate me. I should have asked which people. The backyard smelled like cut grass and charcoal. Someone had been grilling since late morning. Paper plates rattled in the breeze. Laughter floated in short bursts, the kind that never quite settles. I stood near the patio door for a moment, hands at my sides, and let myself be seen. My son-in-law spotted me immediately. He was already holding court near the drinks table, sleeves rolled up, sunglasses pushed back on his head like a crown, the kind of man who fills space loudly, who needs witnesses for everything he does. When he saw me, his mouth curved into something that looked like a grin but didn't reach his eyes. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. I walked toward the table slowly, not because I was weak, but because I'd learned long ago that speed invites mistakes. People rush when they're nervous. I wasn't nervous, not yet. Someone called out a greeting. Another guest clapped me on the shoulder. I smiled, nodded, said thank you. I did what I've always done in rooms full of people. I observed. My daughter stood a few steps behind her husband, phone already in her hand, screen angled just enough to tell me she was recording. Her smile was fixed, practiced, the kind you wear when you've decided how the story will be told later. The cake sat at the center of the table. Too big, too elaborate. Frosting piped thick and neat, my name spelled in looping letters, candles waiting off to the side. It was still early, no singing yet, no wish. He came up behind me without warning. I felt it before I saw it. A sudden shove at my shoulder, just enough to throw me off balance. My foot slid on the grass, and before I could steady myself, something cold and gritty exploded across my face. Dirt, loose soil scooped from one of the garden beds and flung hard right into my eyes and mouth. There was laughter. Immediate, loud. I heard my son-in-law's voice over it, sharp and pleased. Lighten up. It's just a joke. I stood there, blinking, soil clinging to my skin, grit crunching between my teeth. Someone clapped. Someone else whistled. The sound washed over me like static. I didn't react. That seemed to confuse him. Before I could wipe my face, he grabbed the back of my neck. Not playfully, not gently, firm, possessive. And then he shoved my head forward, straight down into the cake. Frosting filled my vision, sweet and thick and suffocating. I felt the table jolt, felt the soft resistance of sponge give way under my face. For a second, there was nothing but noise and sugar and pressure. Then he let go. The laughter came back, louder this time, but it wasn't the same. It wavered. Some people stopped clapping. A few went quiet altogether. I stayed where I was for a moment, hands braced on the table, breathing slow. I could feel frosting dripping onto my shirt, feel dirt grinding into the icing stuck to my cheeks. My daughter laughed, not loudly, nervously, like she was waiting for someone else to decide how funny this was supposed to be. I straightened up carefully. I reached for a napkin and wiped my eyes, then my mouth, then my hands. Each movement deliberate, unhurried. My son-in-law was grinning, arms spread wide, soaking it in. "Come on," he said. "You can take a joke." I looked at him fully then, really looked, and smiled. Not the smile people expect. The other one. The one I used to give men who thought they were untouchable. Men who believed the room was on their side because it was laughing. Very memorable, I said quietly. I reached into my pocket and wrapped my fingers around my phone. He didn't notice. Nobody did. I excused myself calmly. Told the guests I needed to clean up. A reasonable thing for a 70-year-old man with dirt and cake on his face to say. No one questioned it. As I walked back toward the house, I could hear him already retelling it, adding details, turning humiliation into a story where he was the hero. I closed the door behind me and let the noise fade. In the bathroom mirror, I saw what he'd done. Dirt streaked through frosting. My shirt ruined. My eyes red but clear. I turned on the tap, and as the water ran, I pressed record, because people like him always think the moment ends when the laughter does. They never consider what happens after I didn't rush back outside. That was important. People expect anger to move quickly. They expect raised voices, slammed doors, some kind of immediate reaction they can point to and later dismiss as overreaction. I gave them none of that. I cleaned my face slowly. Dirt swirled down the sink. Frosting stained the porcelain pink and brown before disappearing. I changed my shirt, choosing another plain one from the closet, and looked at myself once more in the mirror. Calm wins time. Time wins options. When I stepped back into the backyard, the mood had shifted. Not enough to stop the party, but enough that everyone felt it. Conversations were quieter. Laughter came late, forced. People avoided my eyes, then overcorrected by smiling too much. My son-in-law was still energized. Adrenaline does that to people like him. He had a beer in his hand now, shoulders loose, confidence spilling out of him as if nothing serious had happened. "Hey!" he called out when he saw me. "There he is!" He walked over and clapped a hand on my shoulder, heavy and familiar, like ownership. "You good?" he said loudly. "Didn't mean to get you so messy." I looked down at his hand on my shoulder, then back up at his face. "I'm fine," I said. "Just needed a moment." He grinned, satisfied. He turned back to the crowd as if that settled it. My daughter didn't come over. She stayed near the table, phone still in her hand, screen dark now. She wouldn't meet my eyes. When she did glance my way, it was quick, measuring as if she were checking whether the situation had escalated beyond her control. A woman I barely knew approached me quietly. One of the neighbors, I thought. She handed me a fresh napkin. "That was a bit much," she said under her breath. I nodded once. "Thank you." I made my way through the guests, shaking hands, accepting half-formed apologies that never quite became words. People like to believe silence is consent. They confuse politeness with forgiveness. Near the fence, an older man cleared his throat. "He shouldn't have done that," he said, not quite looking at me. "No," I replied, "he shouldn't have." That was all. I drifted toward the patio where I could see and hear without being central. From there I watched. My son-in-law was already retelling the moment, embellishing it, demonstrating with his hands. Dirt first, cake second. He laughed hardest at his own punchlines. Someone asked, "Was that planned?" He shrugged. "Spur of the moment. You know how it is." I did know how it was. I'd spent decades listening to men explain away things they absolutely meant to do. I slipped my phone from my pocket and held it low, screen dark, lens angled just enough. No theatrics, no obvious recording posture, just documentation. He kept talking. "Guy's tougher than he looks," he said. Didn't even get mad. A few nervous laughs followed. Someone shifted uncomfortably. My daughter laughed too, briefly, too quickly. "He's old school," she added. "Doesn't take things personally." I felt something settle in my chest then. Not anger, not sadness, finality. I walked over to the drinks table and poured myself a glass of water. As I stood there, he came up beside me again. "No hard feelings, right?" he said. "You know I wouldn't do that if I didn't love you." Love, another word people misuse when they want cover. "No hard feelings," I said. He smiled, relieved. "That's what I figured." He wandered off, satisfied that the moment had passed. It hadn't. The party began to thin after that. Guests found reasons to leave early, errands, other commitments. The sun shifted, shadows lengthening across the grass. By late afternoon, only a handful of people remained. My daughter came up to me near the back door. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Yes." She hesitated. "You didn't have to make it awkward." I looked at her. Really looked this time. At the woman she'd become. At the choices sitting just behind her eyes. "I didn't," I said. She frowned, then nodded as if filing that away for later. They left together shortly after. He didn't say goodbye. Just tossed a casual wave over his shoulder like he'd done me a favor by showing up at all. When their car pulled away, the backyard fell quiet. Paper plates fluttered in the breeze. The ruined cake sagged at the center of the table, dirt still visible along one edge, frosting caved in where my face had been. I stood there alone for a moment. Then I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and reviewed the recordings. Every laugh, every word, every careless explanation, clear as day. Some people think revenge is about volume. They're wrong. It's about timing. And timing, once you understand it, has a way of making the next steps feel inevitable. I waited until the last car disappeared down the street before I made the call. Not because I needed courage, because I needed quiet. The house felt different once the noise drained out of it. Chairs sat crooked in the yard. Half-empty cups rested where people had set them down and forgotten them. The afternoon light slanted low enough to make long shadows stretch across the grass. I stood at the kitchen counter and replayed the recordings again, this time with the volume turned low. The dirt, the shove, the cake, the laughter afterward, and then his voice, clear and unguarded, explaining it away. I didn't rush to label it. I didn't need to. Years ago, I learned that facts don't require decoration. They speak plainly if you let them. I stepped out onto the back porch, phone in hand, and dialed. "I need to report an assault," I said when the dispatcher answered. "It happened this afternoon. I have video." There was a pause, then questions. Location. Description. Whether I was injured. "I'm shaken," I said. Not confused. That distinction mattered. They told me someone would come by shortly. I thanked them and ended the call. Inside, I moved through the house methodically. Straightened a chair. Tossed napkins. Rinsed frosting off a plate. Not because I cared about the mess, but because order has a way of keeping your mind steady. While I worked, pieces fell into place. This wasn't the first time he'd crossed a line. Just the first time he'd done it in front of witnesses. In daylight, on my birthday, people like him escalate when they think no one is paying attention. I thought about past moments I'd dismissed. The way he liked to grab my shoulder a little too hard. The jokes at my expense that always drew laughter at my silence. The way my daughter would glance at me afterward, measuring whether I was about to cause a problem by reacting. I hadn't reacted. I had documented. A knock sounded at the front door. 2 officers stood on the porch, one older, one younger. Both neutral, professional. I invited them in. They listened while I explained what happened. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't editorialize. I described the sequence: dirt, force, cake, laughter, recording. When I handed them my phone, the younger officer's expression changed as the video played. "That's not a prank," she said quietly. "No," I replied, "it isn't." They asked about witnesses. I gave them names where I could, descriptions where I couldn't. One neighbor, a woman who'd gone quiet. Immediately. Another man who'd looked away. "And your relationship to the person who did this?" the older officer asked. "My son-in-law." That earned a glance between them. Not surprise. Recognition. They stepped outside to make a call. I stood in the doorway and watched the sky deepen toward evening. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower started up, life continuing unaware. When they came back in, their tone had shifted. "Sir," the older officer said, "we need to ask you something. Is your son-in-law currently on probation?" I met his eyes. "Yes." "For a prior assault?" "Yes." The younger officer exhaled slowly. "That changes things," she said. They explained what would happen next. How they'd need to locate him, how the recording mattered, how probation violations don't leave much room for interpretation. I nodded. I already knew. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table again, hands folded, and waited. It didn't take long. My phone rang just after sunset. My daughter's number. "What did you do?" she demanded the moment I answered. I reported what happened. Her voice rose. "You called the police? Over a joke?" "It wasn't a joke. He didn't mean it like that." "He meant it exactly like that." There was silence on the line. Then anger, raw and sharp. "You embarrassed him," she said. "In front of everyone." I closed my eyes briefly. "He assaulted me," I replied, "in front of everyone." She hung up. The second call came from an unfamiliar number. "This is Officer Ramirez," a voice said. "We've located your son-in-law." I didn't ask where. "He's being detained," the officer continued. "Given his probation status, he'll be taken in for questioning." "Thank you," I said. I ended the call and sat very still. This wasn't satisfaction. It was alignment. Things snapping back into place after being bent too long. Later that evening, headlights swept across my living room wall. A patrol car idled outside. I watched from the window as my daughter stepped out of her car, phone pressed to her ear, pacing. Another car pulled in behind her. Then I saw him. His posture was different now. Shoulders tight, jaw clenched, the confidence gone, replaced by disbelief. When the officers led him toward the car, he looked up and saw me watching from the window. Our eyes met. For the first time that day, he didn't smile. The door closed. The engine started. Red and blue lights reflected off the house as the car pulled away. I turned off the porch light and sat down in the quiet. The day had begun with laughter. It ended with handcuffs. And somewhere between those two moments, a line had finally been crossed in a way that couldn't be laughed off anymore. The next morning arrived without ceremony. No sirens, no shouting. Just light spilling through the kitchen window and the quiet awareness that nothing would be handled privately anymore. I slept for a few hours, then woke before dawn out of habit. Years of routine don't vanish just because circumstances change. I made coffee, sat at the table, and opened a notebook I hadn't used in a while. Dates, times, who stood where, who laughed, who looked away. I wrote without emotion, the way I used to when facts mattered more than feelings. By mid-morning, my phone rang again. It was the same officer from the night before. "They're holding him," she said. "Because of the probation violation, he won't be released today." "Understood. There will be a hearing," she continued. "Likely sooner than later. I'll be ready." After I hung up, I stared at the backyard through the glass door. The table was still there. The cake still half ruined. Dirt still ground into the grass where it had been scooped up so casually. I didn't clean it yet. Some things deserve to be seen in daylight. Late morning brought another knock. This one was softer. My daughter stood on the porch alone. No sunglasses, no phone in hand. Her eyes were red, but her posture was rigid, like she'd rehearsed what she was about to say and didn't intend to deviate. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She went straight to the kitchen, sat at the table, folded her hands. The same table where she used to do homework, where she'd once cried over a broken heart and let me make it better. "This didn't have to happen," she said. "It already did." She looked up at me sharply. "You know what I mean." I sat across from her. "Say what you mean." Her jaw tightened. "You knew what he was like. You could have stopped it." "That's not how responsibility works," I said. "The person who does something owns it." She shook her head. "You embarrassed him." I let the words sit. "Did you laugh?" I asked. She hesitated. Too long. "Did you record it?" I continued. Another pause. "Yes," she said, "but it was just—" "For who?" I asked. "You?" Her eyes flicked away. That was answer enough. She leaned forward then, voice dropping. "They're talking about jail." "Yes." "You didn't have to push it this far." "I didn't push anything," I said. "I documented it." Her expression hardened. "You always do this. Turn things into cases." I nodded slowly. "Because cases are where truth survives." She stood abruptly. "You think you're right. You always do." "I think what happened was wrong," I replied, "and I think pretending otherwise would make me complicit." That word landed. Complicit. She froze, then laughed sharply. "So now I'm the villain too. You decided that yourself," I said quietly. She left without another word. That afternoon I met with an attorney I'd worked with once, years ago. Not socially, professionally. He listened, asked questions, watched the video twice. "This is clean," he said. "Very clean." "What happens now?" I asked. "The probation violation is the immediate issue," he said. "But this opens other doors, especially if there's a pattern." "A pattern of what?" He tapped the folder. "Control, intimidation, public humiliation. That kind of behavior rarely exists in isolation." I thanked him and went home. That evening my phone buzzed with messages I didn't open. Neighbors, family, friends, people suddenly concerned. I ignored them all. Instead, I walked back into the backyard and sat in one of the folding chairs. The sun dipped low, casting the table in shadow. Flies buzzed around the cake. I thought about how easily people laugh when they think someone else will absorb the cost. I thought about how fast laughter dies when consequences arrive. The hearing was scheduled for 2 days later. My daughter texted once more that night. "We need to talk before this gets worse." I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone face down. Some conversations only matter after certain truths are acknowledged, and she wasn't there yet. I went inside, washed my hands, and finally threw the cake away. As the lid of the trash bin closed, I felt something click into place. The mess was gone. The record wasn't. And the story everyone thought had ended in the backyard was only just beginning to make sense. The hearing took place in a small room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. No grand courtroom, no audience. Just a judge, a clerk, 2 officers, an attorney, and a man who suddenly looked much smaller without a crowd behind him. I arrived early and sat in the second row. I didn't need to be up front. Visibility wasn't the point. Presence was. When they brought him in, he avoided my eyes. The confidence that had carried him through the backyard was gone, replaced by something tighter, more brittle. His hands were clasped in front of him, fingers working nervously, like he was trying to knead courage out of thin air. The judge didn't waste time. The video played. Again. Dirt, force, cake, laughter. There's something different about watching behavior replayed in silence, stripped of cheers and excuses. The room stayed quiet as the footage ended. "This occurred while you were on active probation for a prior assault," the judge said. "Yes, Your Honor," his attorney replied quickly. "But this was a family gathering. There was no intent to—" The judge raised a hand. "Intent is not required for violation," she said flatly. "Conduct is." He swallowed. My daughter sat behind him, jaw clenched, arms crossed tightly as if she were holding herself together by force alone. The ruling came fast. Violation sustained. Immediate custody. Next steps to be determined. The deputies stepped forward. That's when he finally looked at me. Not angry, confused. As if he genuinely couldn't understand how a joke had turned into handcuffs. As they led him away, my daughter stood. "This is your fault," she hissed as she passed me. "You wanted this." I didn't answer. Want had nothing to do with it. Outside, the sun was blinding. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, letting it settle. People walked past, busy with their own lives, unaware that something permanent had just shifted inside mine. That afternoon, I did something I should have done earlier. I went through my records, not casually, thoroughly. Bank statements, old mail, account notifications I'd dismissed as glitches or timing issues. Small inconsistencies began to align. Transfers I didn't remember authorizing. Withdrawals that didn't fit my patterns. Nothing dramatic at first, just enough to suggest intention. I made another call. A private investigator this time. Someone I trusted. "I want you to look quietly," I said. "Follow the trail wherever it leads." He didn't ask why. That evening, my daughter came back again. She didn't knock. She stood in the doorway like a visitor who already knew she wasn't welcome. "They're talking about keeping him," she said. "About adding time." "Yes? You could make this easier," she said. "Tell them it was exaggerated, that you weren't hurt." I looked at her. "I was hurt," I said. "Just not the way you mean," she scoffed. "You're destroying our family." "No," I replied. "I stopped pretending it wasn't already broken." Her eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. "You always had to be right." I shook my head. "I had to be honest." She left without another word. The investigator called 3 days later. "Your instincts were good," he said. "There's more." "How much more?" He named a number that made my chest tighten. Not catastrophic, deliberate. Money moved slowly, quietly over time, just enough to avoid alarms, just enough to be missed by someone who trusted the people closest to him. "Who signed off on it?" I asked. There was a pause. "Your daughter," he said. "Using documents that don't look legitimate." I closed my eyes. The humiliation in the backyard had been loud. This was quieter and worse. By nightfall, I sat alone at the kitchen table with paperwork spread out in front of me, the day replaying in fragments. Dirt, cake, courtroom, numbers on a page. The pattern was clear now. The party hadn't been a mistake. It had been confidence. The belief that I was already reduced to a punchline, someone too old, too passive, too polite to push back. They'd misjudged the timeline, and now the clock they'd ignored was ticking in a room they could no longer enter. I gathered the documents into a folder and placed it beside my phone. Tomorrow I would make another call. This time, not to report what had already happened, but to begin accounting for everything that hadn't yet been answered for. The final call I made wasn't difficult. It was inevitable. Once you see the full shape of something, pretending you don't becomes a choice. And I'd made enough choices already. I met with an attorney the next morning, one recommended quietly by the investigator. We sat across from each other in a small office with bare walls and a window that looked out over a parking lot. Nothing dramatic, just a place where decisions get made. He reviewed everything without interruption. The videos, the bank statements, the forged documents, the timeline. When he finished, he closed the folder and leaned back. "This isn't complicated," he said. "It's just unpleasant." "That's fine," I replied. "I'm done avoiding unpleasant things." Charges were filed that week. The process moved faster than I expected. Once the initial thread was pulled, the rest unraveled quickly. Subpoenas brought records. Records brought clarity. Clarity removed doubt. My son-in-law was already in custody for the probation violation. That mattered. It narrowed his options, limited his leverage. My daughter was questioned next. She didn't deny much. At first, she tried to explain it away. Pressure, fear, loyalty. Then when that failed, she pivoted, claimed she'd been misled, that she'd only signed what she was told to sign. The signatures told a different story. So did the timing. She was charged, not with violence, but with something quieter and harder to explain away. Fraud, abuse of trust, exploitation. When the news reached me, I didn't feel relief. I felt tired. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from seeing someone you once loved reduced to the sum of their choices, not because they were forced, but because they were willing. The legal process stretched on for weeks. Hearings, negotiations, delays that felt both endless and brief at the same time. In the end, there were consequences. Not theatrical ones, not cinematic, real ones. My son-in-law was sentenced to time, not the maximum. Enough to remove him from other people's lives for a while and give him time to sit with what he'd done without an audience. My daughter took a deal. Probation, restitution, mandatory counseling. No access to my finances, no contact unless I agreed. I did not agree. The money came back slowly. Monthly transfers, scheduled and verified. Each one arrived without a note. I didn't need one. The backyard returned to normal over time. Grass grew back where the dirt had been torn up. The table went back into storage. The folding chairs disappeared into the garage. I kept the phone, not out of spite, out of principle. I learned something through all of this that surprised me. The humiliation wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how easily everyone laughed, how quickly cruelty became entertainment once someone decided I was safe to target. That kind of laughter teaches you exactly who people are when they think the cost won't fall on them. I spend my days differently now, quieter, more deliberate. I don't host gatherings anymore. I meet people one at a time. I choose my company carefully, not because I'm afraid of being hurt again, but because I've learned how expensive trust can be when it's misplaced. Sometimes I sit in the backyard in the afternoon, coffee in hand, and let the sun warm my face. No cake, no crowd, no performance. Just peace. People ask me if I regret calling the police. I don't. People ask if I wish I'd handled it privately. I don't. And when they ask why, I tell them the truth. Because the moment someone decided it was acceptable to humiliate me in public, they made it a public matter. I didn't escalate anything. I documented it. I didn't destroy my family. I stopped sacrificing myself to preserve a lie. Some people mistake silence for weakness. They think restraint means surrender. They're wrong. Sometimes restraint is just patience waiting for the right moment to speak clearly. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.